Welcome to Gordon, Dark Tales. Tonight's story will take you deep into the heart of Japan, where shadows linger and the past refuses to stay buried. Michael Carter, an American on a business trip, thought his weekend fishing outing with friends would be a peaceful escape. But little did he know, the road to their destination would lead them to a place soaked in whispers of tragedy and vengeance, a tunnel cursed by the spirit of a bride lost on her wedding day. They say she hunts the darkness, searching for those who ignored her cries for help. But is it just a story? Or does something truly evil lurk in the shadows of that tunnel? Tonight, we'll follow Michael's account of that fateful night, where a broken-down car became the stage for terror, and an encounter with the unknown left scars deeper than memory. For the best experience, put on your headphones, dim the lights, and prepare for a journey that might keep you awake long after the story ends. But be warned, fear is inevitable, and tonight, courage is your only option.
My name is Michael Carter, and a few years ago, I had an experience that still sends chills down my spine. At the time, I was 42 and working for an American-based tech company. My job had sent me to Japan for 3 months for a chance to learn from one of the most advanced teams in the world. It was an opportunity I couldn't pass up, though I had no idea how much it would change me. I landed in Tokyo late at night, the air crisp and cool as I stepped out of the airport. The city hit me like a wave, blinking neon signs, towering skyscrapers, and an endless sea of people moving with a purpose I couldn't quite grasp. It was a world apart from my suburban life in Ohio. The first week was a blur of meetings, presentations, and trying to find my footing in a culture so different from my own. Bowing instead of handshakes, taking off shoes before entering certain spaces, and the unspoken rules of politeness was fascinating but exhausting. At work, I quickly realized the language barrier would be my biggest hurdle. Spoke little to no English, and my Japanese was, well, let's just say I could barely order a coffee. That's where Takeshi came in. Takeshi Sato was one of the senior engineers on the team, and he'd spent over a decade living in Los Angeles. His English was perfect, and his sense of humor was sharp. "You'll survive," he said on my second day, handing me a guidebook on Japanese etiquette. "Just don't do anything embarrassing in front of the boss." Then there was Hiroshi Tanaka, a younger engineer who didn't speak much English but always made an effort. His kindness was apparent even without words. Hiroshi would bring me snacks during breaks, small packets of rice crackers or candies, and smile, gesturing for me to try. As the weeks went by, I started to settle into a rhythm. Work was demanding, but my colleagues were patient. Outside the office, Takeshi and Hiroshi became my unofficial guides to Japan. Every weekend, they dragged me out of my comfort zone to explore karaoke bars, sushi spots, ancient temples tucked away in quiet neighborhoods. "Michael," Takeshi said one Friday evening as we wrapped up for the day, "you need to experience the real Japan. Not just Tokyo." "The real Japan?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," he replied, grinning. "Fishing, at night, in the countryside." Fishing wasn't exactly my idea of adventure, but I was curious. And truth be told, I didn't want to miss out on bonding with him. "All right," I said, laughing. "Let's do it." "Why not?" I said with a shrug, feeling the sense of adventure bubbling up. "Count me in." Plan was simple. Takeshi would drive, Hiroshi would navigate, and I'd sit back and enjoy the ride. Early Saturday evening, we piled into Takeshi's car, a compact, well-worn sedan that felt just right for a road trip. The interior smelled faintly of green tea and car freshener, and Hiroshi handed me a small pack of dried squid. "Try it," he said in his halting English, grinning from ear to ear. I hesitated for a moment but took a bite. The flavor was unique, salty, chewy, and unlike anything I'd had before. The drive started off uneventful. As we left Tokyo behind, the city lights faded, replaced by rolling hills and the occasional cluster of houses. Takeshi played a mix of Japanese pop and American rock on the car stereo, and we chatted about everything from work to the differences in our cultures. "Fishing in the countryside is a tradition," Takeshi explained as he maneuvered a winding road. "It's not just about catching fish. It's about connecting with nature, with yourself." "I'll take your word for it," I said, laughing. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the landscape transformed. Fields stretched endlessly on either side of the narrow road, their shadows growing longer under the deepening twilight. The air felt cooler, cleaner, and I found myself staring out the window, mesmerized by the beauty of it all. "We're almost there," Hiroshi announced, pointing to a faint glow in the distance. That's when Takeshi's tone shifted. "Before we get to the fishing spot," he began, glancing at me through the rearview mirror, "there's something you should know." "Oh," I replied, sensing a change in the atmosphere. He hesitated and said, "There's a tunnel on the way. It's just an old road, short, nothing special. But the locals, they have stories about it." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What kind of stories?" "You'll see," he said cryptically, a sly smile tugging at his lips. Hiroshi, however, seemed less amused. His expression darkened, and he muttered something in Japanese that Takeshi didn't translate. The conversation left me with a strange feeling, an unease that grew stronger as we approached what I would soon learn was no ordinary tunnel. The drive to the fishing spot started out lively. The car hummed along the countryside road as Takeshi, Hiroshi, and I exchanged stories and laughs. Takeshi, as always, was the most talkative, his hands occasionally gesturing animatedly as he drove. Hiroshi sat quietly in the back, chiming in only when prompted, but even his reserved nature didn't dampen the mood. I was beginning to enjoy these weekend outings, little windows into Japanese culture I couldn't experience anywhere else. "So, Michael," Takeshi began, his voice tinged with mischief, "have you heard about the tunnel?" I glanced at him from the passenger seat, raising an eyebrow. "The tunnel? Can't say I have." Hiroshi shifted slightly in his seat. His eyes flicked up from his phone, and though he didn't say anything, the movement caught my attention. Takeshi chuckled, a low, theatrical sound. "It, it's a local legend. Everyone here knows about it." I leaned back, folding my arms. "All right, let's hear it." Man, "there's this tunnel," he started, lowering his voice like he was about to tell a ghost story around a campfire. "It's on the way to the fishing spot. People say it's haunted." I rolled my eyes, though I couldn't help the faint prickle that crept up my neck. "Haunted, huh? Let me guess. Someone died there?" "Exactly," Takeshi said, glancing at me with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "But it's not just anyone, it's a bride. She was on her way to her wedding when her car crashed in the tunnel. They say she was trapped, injured, crying out for help, but no one came." Hiroshi let out a quiet sigh from the back seat, the kind of sound someone makes when they wish a conversation would end. "And now," Takeshi continued, ignoring him, "she's still there, stuck in her wedding dress, waiting for the people who left her to die. The car hit a slight bump in the road, and I felt my stomach twist. Not from the story, of course. It was just the road, uneven and unlit." "So what happens if you see her?" I asked, playing along. "They say she appears in the middle of the tunnel, standing perfectly still," Takeshi said. His tone was almost too casual, like he was daring the story to be true. "If you stop, she stares at you. If you try to keep driving, well, that's when things get bad." Hiroshi muttered something in Japanese, his tone low, uneasy. I didn't catch the words, but the discomfort in his voice was hard to miss. "Come on," I said, forcing a laugh. "You don't really believe that, do you?" "Who knows?" Takeshi replied, shrugging one shoulder. "It's just a story, right?" But his eyes darted to the rearview mirror, meeting Hiroshi's for the briefest moment. And I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as skeptical as he claimed. The mood in the car shifted. The laughter and casual banter that had filled the space earlier gave way to an uneasy quiet. Even the countryside seemed to respond. The night growing darker as the road narrowed. I told myself it was just a tale, the kind locals tell to make the mundane feel mysterious. But as we drove on, the tension in the car clung to me, thick and unshakable. Takeshi broke the silence, his voice calm but carrying an unsettling weight. "You don't need to worry, Michael. According to the story, she only appears after midnight. That's when she died." I shifted in my seat, glancing at him. "Midnight?" He nodded, his hand steady on the wheel. They say she was trapped in her car, pinned under the wreckage, unable to move. She cried for hours, but no one came. The tunnel isn't very busy, especially late at night. By the time someone finally found her, it was too late. His words hung in the air like the lingering scent of smoke after a fire. I felt a faint chill creep up my spine, and I glanced at Hiroshi. He was staring out the window, his reflection faintly illuminated by the dashboard lights. Then, Takeshi added with a wry smile, as long as we're out of the tunnel before midnight, we'll be fine. I forced a laugh, leaning back in my seat. Well, there's nothing to worry about, right? Takeshi chuckled softly, but it didn't ease the tension in the car. The laughter felt more like a shield, a way to keep the unease at bay. Exactly, he said. Hershey muttered something in Japanese again, barely audible over the hum of the engine. His tone carried the same discomfort as before, but this time I didn't ask for a translation. So I glanced out the window, taking in the desolate landscape. The road was flanked by dense, dark woods, their branches clawing at the night sky. The moonlight barely filtered through, casting long skeletal shadows across the asphalt. Relax, guys, I said, forcing a casual tone. I don't believe in that kind of stuff. Ghosts, haunted tunnels, it's just local folklore. My words were meant to reassure them, or maybe myself, but they felt hollow, like an echo bouncing off empty walls. The truth was, the story had gotten under my skin. I couldn't shake the image of the bride, alone in that cold, dark tunnel, waiting for help that never came. The silence returned, heavier this time. The hum of the engine seemed louder, the air in the car thicker. I glanced at the dashboard clock. 11 o'clock, 1 hour to go. I told myself it was just another story. Another myth meant to add mystery to an otherwise ordinary place. But the deeper we drove into the countryside, the quieter it became. And with every passing minute, the shadows outside the car seemed to grow darker, the road narrower, and the night colder. I leaned forward, peering into the distance. Somewhere out there, the tunnel waited. And whether I believed in the story or not, I couldn't deny the growing unease settling in my chest. The clock on the dashboard read 11:30 p.m. as the car crept closer to the looming shadow of the tunnel. Takeshi eased off the gas, his hands gripping the wheel a little tighter. We're almost there, he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. I leaned forward, narrowing my eyes at him. Why are you slowing down? It's 11:30. Just go through it already. From the back seat, Hiroshi's voice broke through the tense silence. Hayaku, he exclaimed sharply. Even with my limited understanding of Japanese, I knew what it meant. Hurry up! Takeshi glanced at me, then at Hiroshi in the rearview mirror. His jaw tightened and he pressed down on the accelerator, the engine responding with a low growl. The car lurched forward and the entrance to the tunnel loomed larger with every passing second. crossed the threshold, and the darkness swallowed us whole. The tunnel was nothing like I'd imagined. It was worse. The walls were narrow, just barely wide enough for two cars to pass. Moisture dripped from the ceiling, leaving streaks of black and green lichen crawling down the sides. The air inside felt damp and heavy, like the breath of the earth itself. The headlights barely cut through the murk. Dim overhead lights hung in uneven intervals, some flickering, others completely dead. The faint hum of electricity buzzed intermittently, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. I glanced at the walls as we passed, their surfaces slick with algae and grime. The road beneath us was uneven, riddled with potholes that caused the car to jolt every so often. Water pooled in some of them, reflecting the faint light like tiny, trembling mirrors. No one spoke. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the low rumble of the engine and the occasional splash as the tires hit a puddle. My eyes darted to the dashboard clock, 11:33 p.m. It felt like the tunnel stretched on forever, each second dragging into an eternity. My chest tightened as I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself it was just a tunnel, just another stretch of road. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was off. The shadows seemed to move, twisting and stretching in ways that didn't match the rhythm of the car's motion. The dim light played tricks on my mind, shapes forming and dissolving in the corners of my vision. "How much longer?" I finally asked, my voice breaking the tense quiet. Takeshi didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. "Not long," he said at last, though his voice betrayed a tension he couldn't hide. Hiroshi muttered something under his breath, his tone low and uneasy. I didn't need a translation to understand the gist of it. He didn't want to be here any more than I did. The tunnel seemed to grow darker the deeper we went, the faint light behind us fading into nothing. The walls closed in around us, their damp surfaces glistening like the hide of some massive slumbering creature. I glanced at the clock again. 11:35 p.m. Each minute felt heavier than the last, the weight of the tunnel pressing down on us. And though I told myself it was just another drive, just another story, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching, waiting in the dark. The silence inside the tunnel was abruptly shattered by a sharp, high-pitched screech. Something darted across the road, quick and low, too fast to make out. It splashed through one of the puddles, the sound amplified by the confined space. Takeshi reacted instinctively, slamming on the brakes. The tires screeched against the wet asphalt and the car skidded. We lurched forward as the vehicle veered to the right, the wheels losing grip on the slick surface. Before anyone could shout or react, the car slammed into the damp wall of the tunnel with a sickening crunch. The jolt sent me forward against the seatbelt, knocking the wind out of me. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, broken only by the faint hiss of the engine. Takeshi let out a shaky breath. I'm sorry. Are you guys okay? I looked around, my heart pounding in my chest. Yeah, I think so. Hiroshi, sitting behind me, nodded quickly. I'm fine, he said, though his voice was tight. We all got out of the car, the tunnel's damp air hitting me like a cold slap to the face. The dim, flickering lights above barely illuminated the damage. The front right side of the car was crumpled against the wall. The headlight on that side was completely smashed, shards of glass scattered across the wet asphalt. Takeshi rubbed the back of his neck, his face a mask of guilt. I'm sorry, he said again. But don't worry, it's a company car and it's insured. I exhaled, trying to calm my nerves. Still, that was a hell of a scare. Just be more careful, okay? Hiroshi, always practical, glanced at his watch and spoke up. Let's go, he urged, his voice unusually firm. He held up his wrist, showing the time, 11:51 p.m. My stomach sank. Less than 10 minutes to midnight. We climbed back into the car, hoping to get moving as quickly as possible. Takeshi turned the key in the ignition. Nothing. He tried again, his movements more frantic this time. The engine made a choking noise but refused to start. What's going on? I asked, my voice edged with panic. I don't know, Takeshi muttered, his frustration clear. He twisted the key again, harder this time, but the car only sputtered and fell silent. Hiroshi leaned forward, his hands gripping the back of Takeshi's seat. Try again, he urged. But it was no use. The car was dead. I looked around the tunnel, the darkness pressing in on all sides. One of the overhead lights flickered violently, casting jagged shadows across the walls. Then, with a faint pop, it went out, leaving us in an even deeper gloom. I slumped back in my seat, running a hand through my hair. Great, just great, I muttered to myself. I'm good with tech, not cars. This is what I get for relying on Uber my whole life. The tension in the car was palpable, each of us caught in our own uneasy thoughts. The dashboard clock now read 11:53 p.m. And as we sat there, stranded in the middle of that cursed tunnel, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The tension in the car was suffocating. I could feel it in the air, thicker than the dampness that clung to the tunnel walls. The engine had gone silent, and so had Takeshi and Hiroshi. Something wasn't right. Takeshi pulled out his phone, his fingers fumbling over the screen as if dialing for help. But then he froze. He tilted the phone toward Hiroshi, his face tight with worry. Curious, I leaned over to see for myself. No signal, no bars, no Wi-Fi, just a blank screen where there should have been a connection. Takeshi muttered something under his breath in Japanese, his tone sharp. Hiroshi's reaction was immediate. He slammed his palm against the seat, the sound echoing harshly in the confined space. He snapped something back at Takeshi in a raised voice. I had no idea what they were saying, but it was clear they were arguing. Takeshi gestured at the phone, Hiroshi pointed out the window, and the words flew back and forth like arrows. Hey, I said, raising my hands. Guys, calm down. Let's not lose it here. They didn't seem to hear me. Hiroshi was practically yelling now, his frustration spilling over. Finally, I couldn't take any more. All right, enough, I snapped. Let's just push the car and get out of here, okay? Hiroshi turned to Takeshi, his face flushed with anger, and shouted something that I couldn't catch. It sounded like a scolding. His voice was clipped and accusatory. Whatever he said, it hit Takeshi hard. He lowered his head, muttering under his breath, almost like an apology. I'll push it, I said, my voice firmer this time. By myself if I have to. I reached for the door handle, determined to break the mounting tension. The air outside felt colder than before, sharper. It bit at my skin as I stepped out onto the slick asphalt. Stay in the car, I told him over my shoulder. I've got this. I placed my hands on the back of the car, feeling the damp surface beneath my palm. And for a moment, the tunnel was silent, again oppressively so. I placed both hands firmly on the back of the car, bracing myself against its weight. The damp metal was cold, almost biting, beneath my palms. All right, Michael, I muttered to myself, just push the damn thing. The car felt heavier than it should have, more like shoving a truck than a compact sedan. My feet slipped on the wet asphalt as I strained against the immovable weight, my breath forming shaky clouds in the frigid air. Inside the car, Takeshi and Hiroshi were still arguing, their muffled voices blending into the oppressive atmosphere of the tunnel. But then, something shifted. A feeling, sharp and immediate, pierced through the chill. It was unlike anything I'd ever felt before, a deep, gnawing dread that sank into my chest and settled there, heavy and unrelenting. The air seemed to thicken, pressing against my skin, making it harder to breathe. I stopped pushing and stood there, frozen, my hands still gripping the car. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just a car breakdown or an argument between friends. This was something else. A cold shiver ran down my spine, sharp and insistent. I clenched my jaw and told myself, don't look. Just keep going. It'll pass. The feeling grew stronger, heavier, darker. The air itself felt alive, buzzing faintly against my ears. Takeshi and Hiroshi's voices had faded into nothing. All I could hear now was my own ragged breathing and something else. The sound, faint at first, but unmistakable. A woman's cry. It started softly like a distant echo, but soon grew louder, closer. It wasn't just crying, it was a wail. Raw and agonized, as if someone was in unbearable pain. My hands slipped from the car, trembling. My legs felt rooted to the ground, unwilling to move. What is this? I saw, panic rising in my chest. No, no, this isn't happening. I told myself to turn around, to yell for Takeshi and Rochelle, but the words wouldn't come. The crying continued, a haunting melody of sorrow and despair. And like a whisper in my ear, I heard a faint, trembling voice cutting through the wail. Why, Michael? Why didn't you help me? Yeah, I felt my heart stop. A cold shiver shot up my spine, locking every muscle in place. My breath caught in my throat as I forced myself to turn around. And then I saw her. She stood in the faint flickering light of the tunnel, a vision of horror frozen in place. Her wedding dress, once white and pure, was soaked and smeared with blood, the fabric torn and clinging to her slender frame. A veil hung loosely over her face, but even through the gauzy material, her eyes pierced through, empty, wide, and unblinking. Those eyes, they weren't human. They bore into me, dragging me into a depth of fear I didn't know existed. My chest tightened as I tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond. My arms felt like lead. My legs rooted to the ground. I tried to scream, to call out for Takeshi or Hiroshi, but no sound came. I was trapped. Her presence was suffocating, a force that weighed down on me like an invisible chain. She began to move, her steps slow and deliberate. The sound of her dragging feet echoing off the tunnel walls. Now, the closer she came, the more I felt myself slipping into the abyss of those eyes. The world around me faded. It was just her and me. What was I doing here? A sudden sharp yank jolted me back to reality. Michael! Hiroshi's voice broke through the haze as he gripped my arm and pulled me with surprising force. The spell shattered. My legs buckled, and I stumbled backward, gasping for air, as Hiroshi dragged me toward the car. The engine roared to life, and Takeshi yelled something in Japanese that I didn't understand, but the urgency in his voice was clear. Hiroshi shoved me into the back seat, slamming the door shut behind me. Go, 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 I shouted, my voice finally breaking free. Takeshi didn't wait for another word. He floored the gas pedal and the car screeched forward, tires slipping briefly on the wet asphalt before gripping and surging ahead. I twisted around in my seat, my heart pounding as I stared out the rear window. The bride stood there, motionless in the middle of the tunnel, her veil lifting slightly as if caught by an unseen wind. Those lifeless white eyes followed us as we sped away, growing smaller and smaller until the darkness swallowed her hope. But even as we left her behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't done with me.
As Michael and his friends finally left the tunnel, they made a stop at a convenience store to catch their breath. Over hot cups of coffee, they shared nervous laughter. Takeshi and Hiroshi teased Michael, calling him strong in body but weak with ghosts. A playful jab that Michael knew was meant to lighten the mood. But deep inside, he knew the truth. The image of the bride, her blood-stained dress, and those haunting, empty eyes, none of it was their imagination. Only Michael had seen her. In Japan, spirits and wandering souls are more than just folklore. They're woven into the cultural fabric, a belief passed down through generations. But what Michael witnessed, was it truly an unsettled soul or something far darker? And now, dear listener, we leave the mystery in your hands. What do you think Michael saw in that tunnel? Was it a restless spirit bound by tragedy, or a sinister force preying on fear? Share your thoughts or even your own experiences in the comments. We'd love to hear them. If tales of terror and suspense intrigue you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more haunting stories. And before you go, we recommend watching the next chilling account of a 12-year-old girl and the unspeakable horrors beneath her bed. Click the video on your screen if you dare. Sleep well, if you can.